Hey everyone, I hope you're well. Welcome to my weather forecast for the Strawberry Supermoon. So we're going to look at the energies for the next 2 weeks for the supermoon in Sagittarius, and this is kind of an interesting one. It's quite a positive one, which I think will make a nice difference from the previous sort of Taurus Scorpio kind of set of the eclipse energy, particularly that Scorpio supermoon. That was quite intense. This is a lot more kind of upbeat, kind of open, expansive, quite optimistic as well. And it kind of comes at a time where we've got quite a lot to look forward to astrologically, particularly as we get to the solstice, when we have what astrologers are kind of calling the culmination of the Grand Alignment. So this is the alignment of the 7 visible planets kind of across the line of the horizon, sort of around about dawn, if you're talking like UK time, on the 22nd of June. But of course it's going to be around for a couple of, I suppose a couple of weeks, because some of these planets move quite slowly. But I think it's going to culminate around about that time with the heliacal rising of Mercury and Venus. So it should be pretty spectacular. It should be well worth kind of looking out for. So we're going to get into that a little bit as well. And I'm also going to just do a quick look at the kind of cosmic weather in terms of the cosmic calendar for the next 2 weeks, so that we can get a sense of where we're kind of going between now and the end of June. So let's dive in and see what we've got to look forward to. So I thought, as a kind of a quick recap, I did kind of touch on this during the Scorpio supermoon eclipse, but just for those of you who don't know what a supermoon is, essentially a supermoon is a full moon that appears larger than usual. So it can often look quite dramatic. It's often about 14% bigger and 30% brighter in the sky than usual. So it's definitely something you notice. And this is basically when the moon is at what we call perigee, which is when it's at its closest point in its orbit to the Earth. So it is kind of just nearer, and so it does just look bigger. But these can sometimes coincide with things like spring tides, although in this case, we know we're near kind of spring, so that the planets are not at the equator. And sometimes with volcanic eruptions, although the sort of evidence for this is somewhat slim, no one's actually been able to find a direct correlation between supermoons and earthquakes or volcanic eruptions. But nonetheless, there have been a few events where tsunamis and earthquakes have happened, such as the tsunami we had in Japan in 2011. But anyway, astrologically, this is generally considered to be a kind of an extra amped, or like an extra full moon. So I mean, full moons in and of themselves tend to kind of amplify the emotions, make reactions to things bigger. We tend to also see things often a lot more clearly, because of course the moon is illuminated. So there's this sense of like things coming into vision, or into kind of manifestation sometimes as well, but it can be it can coincide with a bit of drama, or kind of larger than life types of events. So it's just something to be aware of. But I think in this case it's more likely to be that kind of larger than life comical energy that Sagittarius is known for, that slightly goofy, the kind of the joker or the jester, that type of thing. So hopefully positive emotions amplified rather than negative emotions. So that's kind of a quick overview of the supermoon. Let's get into the actual meaning of the Sagittarius types of themes that we can look forward to. So kind of going over this quickly, we are talking about mutable fire energy, because of course Sagittarius is the mutable fire sign. So we're talking about the element of fire, but also, if we want to talk in tarot terms, we're talking about wands. So this is really about getting our spark back, about feeling hopeful, optimistic, or inspired. I think the last time I did a full moon forecast around Sagittarius was in December 2021, when we had that, I think it was I can't remember if it was a solar eclipse. I think it could be a solar eclipse. And I kind of talked about enthusiasmos in the Greek sense, and this idea of the Pythia, and how, to be inspired is literally, or to be enthusiastic is to be filled with the god, to be filled with some kind of muse, or with something outside of ourselves, where we almost feel beside ourselves, literally. That's that kind of saying. So there could be an element of that, as I say, because it is a super moon, but hopefully it'll be in a good way. So excited and feeling, a bit more kind of fired up and optimistic than maybe we have in a bit. So I definitely, a lot of the themes, we'll see this with the fixed stars as well, that there's a very much a shift towards the future and about recovering confidence in the future and cultivating sort of enthusiasm again for what's to come. That there's this sense of kind of renewal, there's this sense of, as I say, hope returning, and a pivoting away from the past towards the future as we move away from that lunar eclipse energy, which tends to be about kind of phasing out things from the past 6 months. In terms of quadruplicity, as I said, we are talking about mutable energy, and this does tend to encourage us to be adaptable, flexible, to be kind of a bit more plastic, much like we were at the Gemini new moon. It's a mutable sign, but this is mutable fire, so it's kind of like being enthusiastic and sort of like, even if we're not sure how things are going to turn out, or if we are 100% convinced, it's just kind of like expressing that enthusiasm, saying, yes, I'm willing to give this a try, let's jump in with both feet and just see what happens. It's that kind of vibe. Now, date-wise, it is linked, as I say, to the December 2021 eclipses, and also to the June 2021 eclipses, when we had a similar T-square to Neptune. So this is kind of June of 2021, which was, I think, yeah, it was definitely the first set of eclipses in Gemini and Sagittarius. So you might want to cast your mind back to those two dates to see if there are kind of any parallels in terms of events or themes, that type of thing. Particularly, as I say, that June eclipse, when we did have a T-square to Neptune, and we're getting a repeat of that in this particular full moon, where we've got the luminaries kind of in a T-square to Neptune, but in a positive aspect to Saturn. So in a way, it's continuing the themes that we discussed at the Gemini new moon, when we talked a lot about Saturn, and I kind of went into that whole sort of journey about Mercury and Saturn, and about recovering what's been marginalized, recovering Saturn, seeing Saturn in a more positive light. So I think we're going to be continuing those themes, and working on recovering the kind of positive aspects of Saturn. So it's almost like a kind of, I kept thinking afterwards, it's almost like soul retrieval, where you're kind of like restoring these kind of missing parts, either to yourself or to the kind of collective psyche, particularly around things like the things that have been demonized, or that have been kind of lost on some level, or split off due to things like fear, guilt, or shame. So the Saturn, of course, is about time, so it can be about things like aging, adulting, and maturing. So kind of, having to sort of level up on some level, or take more responsibility for things. That was a big theme with the Saros series that we had at the last solar eclipse, and of course that's still very much in play. And also, as I say, attitudes to aging and to rules. That maybe it's not always such a bad thing to kind of go with the status quo, or and also just to maybe kind of rethink attitudes to aging. I do think we do, particularly in the West, live in a culture that is very much, it's into kind of youth worship, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to sort of balance that out with maybe a healthier attitudes towards the older generation, or to aging. And this idea of, if you think of the polarity of Gemini and Sagittarius, it's very much about things, it's that finding that balance between wisdom on one hand with Sagittarius, and then like facts, but also things like gossip, addiction to novelty. So say, being a compulsive news watcher, for example, which is very Gemini, wanting to always kind of be on trend, to sort of know all the right slang or jargon, to be seen in all the right places, to be quite with it. Whereas the Sagittarius kind of end of the spectrum is a little bit more kind of deep. It's a little bit more philosophical. It looks for the meaning in things. It looks for kind of more perennial wisdom, as opposed to, quickly changing trends. And it also tends to want to kind of distill, wisdom that is separate from facts. And facts, so often change depending on current trends, or certain... I mean, you get trends even in things like science, where certain things tend to kind of come into vogue and then kind of like go out. So this is more about sort of perennial wisdom. And with that, I think with the T-square to Neptune, it's almost kind of asking us to put aside any form of or try to kind of manage or kind of own and get under control any tendency to towards dishonesty, and that can be dishonesty to self or to others, faulty perception, and of course that's very easy when we are in like in kind of peak states, and that could be like a triggered state when you're kind of in fight, flight, or freeze mode, and you might not necessarily see things very clearly. But equally it can be when we're in that sort of that phase of like high romance or addiction, for example, where we may not necessarily we may be seeing the world through rose-tinted specs, put it that way, or where when we kind of in modes of escapism, so maybe kind of overindulging or being like being very ideal, or wanting things to be perfect on some level, and of course life isn't always like that, and also banishing things like unrealistic expectations, magical thinking, romanticism, which may dip into fantasy, and of course victim mentality. That's the other side of Neptune, is the tendency to be a little bit too passive, or to always kind of leave things, to never really take action or take the initiative, and then to sort of like act helpless, so just really kind of watching that. And as I say, there may be links to the June 2021 eclipse when we had similar kind of Neptune squares, so just a day to sort of be aware of. And then the other exciting thing that's happening is that Venus is going to be making a conjunction to Uranus. So she'll be coming off of Uranus and she'll be applying to the North Node. So it's possible that this could set off another set of themes, which will more than likely culminate when we get to that grand alignment, on the 22nd of June, which is a lot about change, and sort of like this can be a change or a need for excitement or independence in relationships. It could be a change or a kind of a reorientation when it comes to our values. It could be a change in the way that we approach money, for example, if you think of things like cryptocurrency and that type of thing. But it can also be about a new creative directions, or unconventional like looks, or being quirky in appearance, that type of thing. Originality, unusual ways to earn money, or to maybe conduct relationships, and just ways of challenging the status quo that may involve Venus-ruled things. So it could be, as I say, art, it could be beauty, it could be fashion, it could be love, romance and sex, it could be our values. So a kind of an interesting shift underway, I feel, and I think this fits quite well with this idea of the future facing or the future oriented energy that we've got with Sagittarius. So as I say, quite a hopeful kind of tone to this particular full moon. And I suppose the only downside to really consider is the restlessness that sometimes that need for adventure can spark off in us, that we can kind of get a little bit of grass is always greener type of syndrome, and not really ever be happy with where we find ourselves kind of right now. And Neptune doesn't always help with that. It can be about disassociating somewhat from the physical realm. Tends to be very much about those kind of elevated spiritual or kind of creative states where we over idealize, where we get very romantic, and as I say, we may not necessarily be very grounded. So I think it's quite important to use Saturn to try and ground, I think, because this Sagittarian energy with particularly if you think about the kind of icon of Sagittarius, the centaur with the bow and arrow, that generally speaking that arrow is normally aimed upwards, and there is a need to keep our feet on the ground. I think if we think of the fact that the centaur is half man, half beast, that if we look at that energy of the sort of the animal side of Sagittarius in a positive way, we could say that it's about remaining grounded, remaining sort of like here on the earth, even if we are kind of aspiring to sort of higher ideals or philosophical kind of wanted to kind of align our actions with our sort of philosophy of life, that type of thing. So, as always, I've done a little cheat sheet for you where you can have a look at where the supermoon will fall in your chart. And of course, we're talking about the sun in Gemini and the moon in Sagittarius. So look for first of all your rising sign, and that will tell you where the moon in Sagittarius will be and what life area or house it will be lighting up, and then the opposite house or sign will be where the sun will be. So those will be the two areas that you're trying to kind of bring into balance, or to sort of find a kind of harmony, find that kind of middle ground between those two signs and what they kind of represent in your natal chart. So I'll leave you to pause the video and have a little look in detail, and I'm going to move on to the Sabian symbol. So this supermoon occurs in the 24th degree of Sagittarius, and the Sabian symbol for this is actually really lovely. It's the Bluebird of happiness. So Linda Hill's interpretation is a bluebird, a sign of good luck and happiness, is standing at the door of the house. So it's almost as though we're on this threshold. We're going to cross this threshold where we're going to move from the slightly more fearful and intense, somewhat dark energy of that Scorpio supermoon into a lighter energy, a lot more, as I say, upbeat, ebullient, optimistic kind of vibe. So quite a nice one this time, which I'm pleased about. So keywords include calmness and rewards, the promise of happiness. Love and happiness are available by acknowledging, their presence. So this is, as I say, really about kind of becoming present and aware, and sort of expressing gratitude for what's in your life already. And of course this, breeds more kind of good vibes, etc., etc. It can be about real estate or house boundaries, because it's literally about kind of front and back doors. So there may be this element of exiting and sort of entering, similar to those the north and the south node. It's also about reminders of joy. Birds are very light creatures, and I think we're being invited to have a kind of a lightness of spirit, which I think is going to really help us to move out of that dark energy of as I say, of the Scorpio lunar eclipse, which has got an orb of about 3 months. It can also be about waiting for invitations to enter. So it could be that we're on the threshold of, a new relationship or something like that, as well as omens of good luck and blessings. So as I say, really, really positive one, and nice to see in a reading for a change. Yes, I mean, again, have a look at the cautions, which is things like denying happiness or good news. So if you want to sort of consider maybe where you don't, or you find it difficult to receive, where you may be kind of caught in, like wounding or kind of trauma that prevents you from kind of inviting love into your life. But I suppose I'm always wary of kind of getting too like preachy about this kind of stuff, because I don't entirely buy into this sort of new age idea that we 100% create our own reality. I think that, if you think about the corollary of that, it also suggests that if terrible things happen to us, that it's entirely our fault, and that isn't always true. If you look at huge things like world wars, or say the whole kind of COVID pandemic, that isn't necessarily true, and I don't think it's a very healthy way of viewing those types of events. There is a certain degree of chaos in the cosmos, and there is a certain element of things being beyond our control, kind of bigger, larger events, to sort of world kind of trends or that type of thing. And so I'm always reluctant to go too much down that sort of route of everything that happens to you is entirely like of your own making. But certainly I think there is this invitation to be open and to allow for more kind of flow and just gratitude, and I suppose you can't really go wrong if you sort of expressing gratitude and feeling open to good things. So yeah, I'll kind of leave it at that. Now in terms of the chart, interesting one, we've got sort of two kind of major aspect patterns kind of going on. So the first is this kind of grand cross that you see here with the sort of the red squares. That will only be for the full moon as seen from England, because the ascendant-descendant axis is going to be different depending on where you are in the world, the line of your horizon. But in this case, we've got the sun and the moon here on the MCIC axis, which is again quite distinctive. It's quite marked and significant. And then on top of that, we've got this T-square that they are making to Neptune here in Pisces, and on the other side a similar T-square to the ascendant. But as I said, this is going to be different for different kind of parts of the world. So I'm just going to focus mainly on the T-square, and as I've already said, we did have a similar T-square to Neptune back in June of 2021, so there may be some links to what kind of goes down now. It could be that you're closing out a cycle that began around about that time, because this is a full moon, and I think the eclipse that we're talking about was a solar eclipse back in June. So it could be that you're kind of closing a kind of a year-long cycle out now that began in June of 2021. Equally, though, it could be if Neptune is going to go retrograde in about a week or so after this this full moon. So around about the 28th of June, Neptune will begin its retrograde, and of course we are kind of entering retrograde season. So it could also mean that you find yourself revisiting certain issues from the past, but perhaps more from a kind of an internal perspective, kind of making sense of things that happened, that were perhaps sparked off by the eclipses in June of 2021. And I've already talked a little bit about Neptune and how it can kind of manifest. I mean, we are talking about Neptune in Pisces, which is the sign that it rules. This is very oceanic, so it could be that there's some link from a kind of mundane perspective to the oceans, kind of, environmental matters, or kind of shipping and exports. That's an area that's been highlighted quite a lot recently, with things like supply chain shortages, and also COVID had quite a big impact on the shipping industry, because of the way that harbours had to change the way that they and ports that they received ships and that kind of thing. So there could be something about that. Equally, it may have something to do with the more spiritual side of Pisces. Pisces rules things like film, music, and spirituality, so it may also highlight those kind of issues for you. And because it's a T-square, the focus here is on this Neptune, so it may be a little bit about escapism. As I say, it could be about addiction, it could be about where you are not entirely honest with yourself or others, sometimes due to things like people pleasing. It could be about where you might be in denial about something, and this may have something to do with this polarity of kind of like knowledge versus wisdom, that we've got with Sagittarius and Gemini. It may also have something to do with things like the news, or like fake news, being in denial about like not necessarily believing certain events, or perhaps going down a rabbit hole, like with what you call it, cults like I can't remember what it was called now, that was so sort of big during COVID. But just potentially that line between where alternative news can sort of tip into conspiracy theory, and that it's good to just be a little bit discerning, and that's the flip side of Pisces is Virgo, which is a lot more discerning and critical. So employing critical thinking to kind of get yourself out of areas where you might be a little bit stuck, or as I say, in denial, or perhaps being hoodwinked on some level, by what you kind of see or hear or read, that type of thing. Then on a more positive note, as I say, we do have the luminaries making two very positive aspects here to Saturn. You can see Saturn's retrograde in Aquarius, and Saturn will be the planet that is the furthermost west during that grand alignment. So it's kind of interesting. You've got Mercury on the furthest east, and then we've got Saturn on the furthest west. So to me it's interesting, given, as I say, those themes that we had at the Gemini new moon around Mercury and Saturn as being almost like the boy, and then the mentor or the teacher, the older man, the sage. That you've got these two planets that are actually in the parts of the sky associated with newness, east on one hand, and then kind of age or wisdom and death on the other hand, with the west. So kind of interesting. There may be sort of something in that. Saturn, as I say, it's virtually unaspected besides the sextile to the moon and the trine to the sun. So it's quite a concentrated energy, and I think it's good. It's quite grounding. If you think, it helps to counterbalance that Neptune energy, which can make us feel a little bit disassociated or ungrounded. Like a lot in our fields. Sometimes we can feel a bit overwhelmed, like our boundaries can be affected quite strongly. Saturn's the opposite. It puts in boundaries. It asks us to be sensible. It says come up with a plan. Justify what you're saying back it up with facts. And so I think these two planets will be helping to kind of counterbalance each other in quite a healthy way. And I think it's also very important to kind of stop and just sort of, I mean, to me, I guess to me it's stating the obvious, but sometimes it's good to just sort of like say these things so that we remind ourselves that, when it comes to astrology, when we're talking about the planets, we're talking about the fact that each of us has aspects of all these archetypes, that our birth chart essentially is like our cosmos in miniature. And so it has all the planets in it, and therefore we have all these aspects. We have a relationship to each of these planets within our own kind of psyche, if you want to talk in Jungian terms, as these kind of archetypes. And obviously they're going to work differently for different people depending on what sign they are, what house they are, aspects, and so on. And so I think it's always important when I'm talking about these planets as kind of archetypes to just remember that we all have a kind of a personal relationship with each of these planets. And so, sometimes I think it's not helpful to over-identify with one planet and to sort of say, I'm very Venusian, or even if that might be true, even if that is your kind of natal dispositor, or whatever the case may be, that we all have these other aspects and these planetary archetypes at work in our own chart. And so it's good to kind of own them. I think, especially given all those themes that we had last time about projecting and tending to sort of demonize others, instead of sort of looking outward, that we kind of own those aspects of Saturn within ourselves, where we feel we need structure, for example, where we quite where we're good at putting in boundaries, and where we may sort of enjoy or kind of tend towards, we might respond well to kind of positive direction from mentors or kind of authority figures in that sort of aspect of our lives, where we like to feel safe, for example, or through things like rules and structures, that type of thing. And that we all have Mercury in us, we all have Neptune. So somewhere in our charts we're going to have this kind of Neptune that is going to be maybe sort of, as I say, ungrounding us a little bit, or where we tend to have escapist tendencies, whether that's binge watching, Netflix, or whether it's a penchant for doja, or whatever the case may be. It's going to be different for everybody, but I think it's just worth kind of bearing that in mind, that it's good to sort of take what all these sort of planets and see them as agents that are working within us at different times in different ways, and kind of like activating certain parts of us, and maybe emphasizing certain life themes at different times. And I think it's a good way to sort of view things. But anyway, getting back to the chart, I think it's interesting that the Sun and the Moon are on the MCIC axis. So it does kind of point to the kind of the trunk of the tree, if you like, in terms of that the sort of the vertical structures of our lives may need to come back into balance. Maybe we were a little bit out of balance in terms of like the public versus the private, for example. If you think that the Sun is in the position of Noon, which is all about being seen, fame, honors, being out there type of thing, versus the Moon, which is down there in the fourth house, which is all about the private domain, about our home, our family, what we kind of get up to in our private life. And there maybe need to kind of bring that into balance. There maybe need to bring work life activities into balance. It'll be different for everybody. But as I say, the fact that the Sun and the Moon are angular is quite significant. It is just sort of putting another spin on things, if you like. That it may be that for example, we wanted to move in a different career direction, but this is going to require us to relocate, for example. Or it may be that we've been working too hard, and so there's a need to kind of come back and reconnect with important people in your life, or spend time at home, or just have some downtime, that kind of thing. So that's something that may or may not resonate, as I say, depending on where you are in the world. And then of course we have Venus separating from Uranus and applying to the North Node, And yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Obviously, it's going to kind of activate that north-south node axis, and that is still very much in Scorpio and Taurus. So, because the eclipses are still in those signs. So it may be that something from the eclipse kind of develops now. If you think about the fact that Venus was making a conjunction to Jupiter, I think, at that solar eclipse, it may be now that there are certain developments where things move on a stage, or where things kind of take an unexpected turn, or where there's renewal, or where maybe you see things from a different perspective, or that on some level some kind of shift happens, and it may be something that is important in terms of like a soul lesson, for example. The North Node can often be about kind of soul lesson, soul contract. Could also be about somebody new kind of coming into your life who's here to be a kind of a catalyst or a change agent, if you like. And you do get those people. I mean, I'm one of those people. I'm what Edward Steinbecker would call a Uranian vessel. I've got a Sun Uranus conjunction in my chart, so you do get those people who kind of come into your life and who may inadvertently, without realizing it, or just through their energy, catalyze change in you, and sometimes that's what's needed to sort of push you forward if you've got stuck in a comfort zone, which is entirely natural when you're talking about the sign of Taurus, which can get a little bit, is very routine oriented and doesn't really like change. So that may be how that kind of works. And then the final thing, as I say, is the Grand Alignment, which we're going to get into in more detail in sort of further on. So an interesting one, and we do have this mini grand trine forming here. You can see between Pluto and Mercury, interestingly, so kind of an out of sign trine, which is interesting because Mercury's in the early degrees of Gemini, and then with the ascendant. So this may not be true for everybody. As I say, depends on where you are, kind of in the world, as to whether this sort of grand trine forms. It may just be that the trine between Mercury and Pluto is what's kind of forming. And of course, this is because Mercury's coming off of that trine to Pluto when it was still in Taurus. So that energy will still be kind of around at this full moon and phasing out, but nonetheless, there may be, it fits quite well with this idea of a shift, a mental shift, with the Gemini Sagittarius axis, that you might have a kind of a paradigm shift in terms of the way you communicate, the way you travel, the way you express yourself, your viewpoints on life, because Mercury is in the 9th house here, so that's all about kind of teaching, learning, philosophy, etc., etc. So there may be some kind of expansion going on, maybe a bit of a download happening, which is certainly possible, and it's something we'll kind of get into when we look at the human design activations. So in terms of like human design transits and gates, I mean, it's a really interesting combination. We've actually got the Sun and the Moon in the two gates that are right next to each other, so gate 11 and gate 12 in terms of number, but they're actually, as we know, on opposite sides of the zodiac. You can see on the human design chart, the body graph, that that gate 11 is in the third eye, or the ajna, and then gate 12 is in the throat center. So it's the sort of the third eye, or the mind, and then the throat, so the throat chakra, that are being sort of activated. So it's very much about communication, which I think is and the way that we think and our perception, which of course is what kind of Gemini and Sagittarius are all about. So that's kind of interesting. So the Sun will be in gate 12, as I said, in the throat chakra, and essentially it's kind of interesting because these two kind of gates are quite different to each other. So on the one hand, gate 12 is about hindrance, and this can be where we're kind of forced to slow down and take stock about something. So we're often inactive in word and deed, and that can sometimes be a good thing. It can make us slow down and not be as distracted, and very often it allows us to almost sort of like reboot or reset and become aware of things that maybe we had sort of blocked out, or that we weren't necessarily aware of. And that this can be a good thing because it can bring things back into focus. And so we start to kind of align more within ourselves, and then in turn we don't really speak until we're ready to speak. And that's an interesting one, because in terms of human design, if you don't normally have the throat center switched on, then you do tend to find it difficult to actually get people to listen to you unless you're asked. So you have to wait to be invited, in terms of like someone saying to you, what's your opinion on X or Y, or how do you feel about that? And then and then you've been given a sort of an opportunity to respond. So I think what it's saying is that when it comes to Gemini matters, so in other words, the more kind of the knowledge and the facts type of thing, the news, the gossip, the more kind of the politics, the novelty aspect, that it's a good time to actually slow down and take stock. So not being so distracted by our phones and what's going on externally, becoming a little bit more inactive so that we can maybe ruminate a little bit more, and that when we're sort of ready to speak, then we can sort of speak, but not sort of before that. And what's also interesting is that it's part of the channel of openness, which runs between the throat and the emotion center. And of course, there's nothing in gate 22 at the moment to sort of activate that channel. So, but if somebody does have this particular gate activated, and they do ask you how you feel, then you may feel that when you do express your feelings, that you feel really heard, and that the other person really hears you. So I think the key thing here is to wait until you're asked or invited to sort of give your opinion or to speak, and that way things will come out a lot better, and you'll have had time to think about how you feel or what you really want to say, and that means that your message will be received more favorably, if you like, or you'll make more of an impact, if you like. Now this gate is also known as the gate of romanticism, which I think is interesting given all that that luminary, the T-square with the luminaries and Neptune. So this is about balancing this sort of the need to espouse ideas that promote social harmony and sort of embrace beliefs that are kind of grounded in your present reality. So in other words, trying to sort of find the balance between your own needs and then those of society. And then this happens in line 1, which is known as standing still. So again, I think it's so interesting that we're coming up to the solstice, which is when the sun is supposed to stand still in the sky before turning. That's what sort of tropos means, this kind of idea of tropic, the tropics. And it's asking us to sort of appreciate how a harsh world can sometimes aid your inner sense of freedom. So in a way, it's about withdrawing from the mainstream, and that you may find that you relate with those, with kind of special like-minded individuals who appreciate your individual needs or viewpoints. So it could be a time when, as I say, you do withdraw a little bit from the world, where you may need to take stock, and I think Saturn can be quite useful for this. Saturn in a way can be about being a little bit, what's the word, like set apart from, or detached from, or sometimes you can feel cut off from, but I'd say it's more about taking yourself away and thinking about things, and not necessarily feeling the need to express yourself all the time. So say being on social media all the time and sort of like, you can kind of get into that verbal diarrhea thing where you feel like you have to post all the time, or you have to have something to say. And I think it's really kind of giving you permission to just enjoy the silence, to be in your own thoughts, and to only really speak when invited to do so, when you feel you have something, that you want to say, something sort of like noteworthy or significant, or that type of thing. And then the moon is going to be in gate 11, which is to say is in the sort of the Ajna center. I realize I've mixed these two things up, that this is actually the throat and this is the Ajna. So the Ajna being the third eye. And this is all about attuning to each moment and pausing to envision and outline prospective futures that might defy previously accepted in mainstream ways. So fits, I think, really nicely with a lot of the fixed star aspects, where, as I say, there is this shift, particularly with Columba, into this more future-oriented energy. And sometimes we need to stop and imagine where we see ourselves going, particularly if we're moving into unknown territory. That we need to sort of imagine for ourselves where we would like to head, and then look at sort of prospective futures, that will move us towards change, and will maybe take us away from previously accepted ways of doing things that we may be disenchanted with, or that we feel we don't really want to kind of align ourselves with kind of going forward. So interesting, this is part of the channel of curiosity, which normally connects between gate 11 and gate 56 here in the throat. And I think it's interesting, as I say, given that the moon is going to be in Sagittarius, that it's all about curiosity, which is a very Gemini type of energy. So really balancing those two qualities out of kind of like curiosity and wanting to learn or take in information on the one hand, and then the need to express on the other. So I think it's sort of almost saying that it's time to kind of like be in receptive mode, where you kind of not really speaking a lot, where you're thinking about things, where you are imagining futures, where you are really in your kind of like almost your sort of your active planning or strategizing kind of mode, and then only when you feel ready to maybe kind of speaking, or even then not necessarily saying anything. Sometimes it's good to keep plans to yourself, particularly if you're worried about kind of naysayers or critics or people kind of putting you off. Sometimes it's better not to say anything and just to kind of go and do something and then surprise everybody, kind of later on. But from, I think this is Richard Rudd, he sees this particular gate as being about peace and ideas. So harmony comes from within and emanates out to the world. So this is real sense, as I say, of kind of moving into the internal domain, and of kind of working things out on that level, coming to terms with things, seeing things from a fresh perspective, re-envisaging where we see ourselves going, what we'd like to happen, and that small efforts can bring about large returns, I think, going forward. So I think this is really about kind of taking ourselves internally and, as I say, developing like a plan for ourselves, or getting clear about what we really believe, or assigning meaning to sort of events, and not necessarily feeling a strong urge to communicate unless we feel kind of called to. Now line 1, which is where the moon is going to be, is about complementing. So it's about progressing by aligning with your immediate environment. So getting really present, I think, with yourself, which fits quite well with the fact that the moon is going to be in the 4th house, in the private domain. So it says your ideas can come and go. Finding the right company in which to share them is important. Yes, so there's a lot here about finding like-minded people who kind of who are sympathetic to your point of view, or that you just feel you vibe with, that get you, and not necessarily feeling that you have to sort of be doing a lot of socializing or being out like in the public domain, that type of thing. That it's more about communing with a smaller group of people, or with your soul tribe, that type of thing. And with the moon, it can be about, yes, again, finding those who will appreciate and help you further your ideas and your plans. So it is about, as I say, getting smaller rather than bigger. It's moving more into the sort of the private domain, spending it with people that you love, with people who get you, people who understand you, and not necessarily feeling the need, as I say, to be kind of out in the world campaigning and persuading, or influencing, or that type of thing. That it's okay to kind of take a break from all that stuff. Maybe go on holiday, go on a spa break, all of that kind of stuff, so that you can get clear perspective on what you really think about certain things, and as I say, not really speak unless you're invited to do so, or you feel that you have something to say. So an interesting one, very interesting one. Now this grand alignment. So as I said, it kind of peaks on the 22nd of June 2022. So interesting dates. We've got a lot of 2s here. And how many is that? That's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And then we add 6 into the bargain for June. So that's kind of interesting. So that sort of breaks down to a 7. So essentially, I think what's kind of interesting about it is the alignment of the 7 visible planets in sort of like in the dawn sky, certainly from the perspective of the UK. So this happens just as the sun is due to rise. You can actually see here that the sky is kind of turning kind of an orangey yellow, because the sun is just below the horizon. And I don't know whether you can see, but we've got Mercury here just rising, and then we've got Venus here. So the two of them kind of heliacally rising with the sun, and then we've got Mars here with the Moon and Jupiter sort of together. They'll also be with Chiron, but you won't be able to see Chiron. And then we've got Saturn over here in the sort of the west, so kind of setting in the west. So we've got, as I said, Mercury and Venus rising, so along with the Sun, so there's this kind of idea of sunrise and new beginnings. And then we've got Saturn sort of setting in the west. So I think quite interesting, given what we were talking about during the forecast at the new moon in Gemini. It does seem to point to further developments of those themes, which were all about initiation and that type of thing, and soul retrieval. So an interesting one. I think the planets won't all be in the same sign, so it's not like an astrological stellium, but it has a kind of a potency in the sense that we've got a lot of concentrated planetary energy in one area of the sky. So literally kind of along the line of the horizon if you are in the UK. And so there's a lot of kind of east to west type of emphasis. So the horizontal axis being emphasized here. And I mean, a lot of people are also interested in the fact that this happens very soon after the solstice. So this is when the sun ingresses into Cancer, and of course this is one of the major turning points of the year, when in the northern hemisphere we get to the longest day, and sort of the culmination, the highest point that the sun gets in the sky from a declination point of view. And of course if you're in the opposite hemisphere, it will be the shortest day, and so on. So it's definitely a kind of a turning point in terms of the relationship between light and dark. And I think a lot of people are sort of seeing this as being a kind of a turning point for humanity potentially, with a lot of concentration of planets, or sort of all being seen at once, if you like. But yeah, I mean, I think certainly from an astronomical point of view will be one of those events that's worth kind of watching, worth getting up early for, and as I say, numerologically an interesting date as well. 7 is sort of the number of Saturn, it's the number of time, but it's also considered to be a very mystical number, to do with sort of spirituality and that kind of thing. So, and of course in the tarot it's associated with cycle change. So an interesting one, and definitely worth kind of looking out for. Yes, as I say, I think it certainly promises to be a special time when kind of added blessings can potentially kind of manifest, where we could get good news if you think about Mercury and Venus with the Sun, and where there's a potential for kind of wish fulfillment, I think, with those with Jupiter and Mars and the Moon being kind of close together. So yeah, it'll be, I think, an interesting time. So here's the chart for it, where you can see the astrology a little bit more clearly. I thought it's quite nice to actually have a look at the chart after we've had a look at the sky. So you can see, as I said, Mercury rising literally on the horizon in the early degrees of Gemini. You can see that Venus is still in the late degrees of Taurus, which is one of the signs that she rules. So she's very happy in Taurus. We've also got Uranus in the mix here, but of course we won't be able to see Uranus with the naked eye; it's too far away. And then Mars in Aries with the Moon and Chiron, so very, very strong masculine energy as well. It's quite interesting. Mars in its own sign of Aries, so very concentrated, very giving us the courage to take risks, very focused energy. There's definitely momentum of this desire to move things forward, or to move forward. And then, as I said, Jupiter also in Aries, newly in Aries, and then we've got Saturn in Aquarius. So yeah, it's interesting, and they seem to be forming a kind of a loose. Saturn seems to be forming a loose kind of mini grand trine here, if you like, with the Sun and with the part of Fortune. I'm trying to see what else is sort of happening. Yeah, so Saturn separating from that trine to the Sun and the Moon that we've got at the full moon. Oh look, Pluto and Venus or will be making a trine as well. They'll be separating from a trine to each other. So that's kind of interesting, given that, that Venus is on the horizon. So that might also indicate positive change kind of coming in, that there may be some fated events that take place that lead to fairly wide-ranging but positive changes, in Venus-ruled and Pluto-ruled matters. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah, it should be an interesting time, as I say, given that the Sun is newly in Cancer. You can see here it's 0 degrees, so it'll moving around about the 21st, I think. And solstice is always for me one of those important thresholds where we are really shifting collectively, as I say, either from light into dark or from dark into light. So the ratios of light to dark slightly changing, but we're kind of reaching a point where the shadows are directly overhead, and that's always interesting, I think, if you want to think about that philosophically or sort of symbolically, in terms of the way that we view things. Now, in terms of fixed star aspects, we've got two interesting fixed star sort of alignments happening. First is the Sun making a pair with the fixed star called Fact, and Fact is part of the constellation of Columba, which is the dove of peace. You can see it down here. Now, what's interesting about it is that it used to be part of the constellation of Argo, the ship, the Argonauts, until around about 1679, when an astronomer separated separated these stars into a separate constellation, so away from kind of the Argo, if you like. And I think it's kind of interesting. It's seen as being about exploration and being willing to venture into the unknown, the sort of the unknown future or unknown territory. So being very adventurous and future oriented. Bernadette Brady interprets this with the Sun as being about somebody who's quite headstrong, who's often a visionary, but someone who doesn't really seek or take advice. So they tend to be trailblazers. They tend to be people who are nonconformists, and pioneers on some level. So either in terms of exploring places, maybe that's why it's called Columba. Maybe it's an allusion to Christopher Columbus. I don't know. Or in terms of the realm of ideas. So as I said, this fits quite well with the Gemini Sagittarius kind of polarity, which is all about knowledge and about truth seeking and that type of thing. And also, I think, with this idea of being open to the new, which I think the Venus-Uranus conjunction is asking us to be open to new ways of seeing and being and doing and that kind of thing. So it's definitely about risk-taking, about being unafraid to explore new horizons. And it can sometimes, according to Bernadette Brady, indicate a preoccupation with novelty, especially given that the Sun, will be moving from Gemini into Cancer. But of course, at this full moon, it will still be in Gemini. And Gemini is, as I say, very trendy, kind of trend-orientated, novelty-focused, and that can lead to that sort of, that sort of distracted energy that we have with our phones, where there's too much kind of going on, and it can affect our concentration a little bit, that type of thing. So just worth kind of bearing in mind, and I think maybe using Saturn to balance that out, to sort of ground us a little bit, so that we don't get too, have out-of-body experiences and can still kind of go about doing our everyday routines without getting out of whack, if you like, that type of thing. So I think overall this particular parent is going to be about our relationship to risk-taking, to the unknown, as well as what we can't control, that there may be certain things that we need to sort of almost make peace with, that are kind of beyond our control on some level. And sometimes that can simply be about not knowing, if you think about, as I say, the Gemini-Sagittarius axis, it can be about what we don't know as much as what we do know. And of course, once you kind of start to learn about a subject, you realize how little you know and how much you can still know. And that feeling, I don't think, ever really disappears. So it could simply be about accepting that you don't know everything, or you don't know what's going to happen, but you're kind of open to seeing, where things kind of go. So that's the Sun. Now the Moon is going to be in pattern with a fixed star called Ras Al Hague. Now this was quite prominent when we had the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction back in December 2020. So Ras Al Hague is part of the constellation of Ophiuchus, and of course some people see this as being the 13th sign of zodiac. I've already explained why that isn't really possible when it comes to tropical astrology, because it's the signs are not actually constellations. They are related to divisions of the what we call the ecliptic, so the path of the sun. But nonetheless, this is a very interesting constellation. It's the constellation of the Healer or the Serpent Tamer, and essentially Ras Al Haig is the alpha star in this constellation. So it's quite bright and prominent. You can see the constellation here, and it's linked in sort of in Greek mythology to Asclepius, who was of course the son of Apollo, so the sun god, and Asclepius was also like a shaman and a healer. So I think we're really being asked to kind of tap into that energy now. If you think about the caduceus and how this is used to symbolize the medical profession, it's two snakes kind of entwined around a wand, and of course that symbol is quite strongly associated with the archangel Raphael, who is the magician kind of archetype, and also the healer. So the magician healer kind of archetype is really what we're talking about here with Ophiuchus. And so it's interesting. I mean, Asclepius essentially is holding serpents. You can see the constellation of the snake here. And, for the ancients, the snake had a lot of positive associations. It wasn't really, we haven't kind of got to the Christian story of the Garden of Eden and all that kind of stuff. So the serpent was still seen in terms of things like rejuvenation, wisdom, and rebirth. So very much along the lines of the more kind of Vedic associations with the serpent of like Kundalini or life force energy. So, if you think about Asclepius as being this healer or shaman, that he's working with the life force energy, kind of up and down the spine and the chakras. And if you think also, again, if we go back to this idea of the shaman as being the person who mediates soul retrievals, who kind of takes us on journeys into, our psychological underworld and helps us to recover parts of us that we've kind of split off or have repressed, or that we've become fragmented around because of trauma or something like that. It fits quite well, as I say, with those themes that we were looking at the Gemini new moon around, the idea of musing with monsters and of finding the sacred in the marginalized spaces, so the places where we've pushed things out to the side, things we don't really want to have a look at because it's too painful, or it sets us off, or it kind of triggers us, or we get angry, or it frightens us, that kind of thing. So I think it's kind of asking us to really to continue with those themes, if you like, and to sort of find ways to recover parts of ourselves that, as I say, we may have kind of demonized or repressed or shut off for whatever reason. So it's interesting that Asclepius is said to have learned how to bring people back from the dead when he saw a snake bringing healing herbs to another. So, as I said, the snake really being seen as a very positive symbol here of renewal. If you think about the Ouroboros and this idea of renewal, because a snake always sheds its skin. And I think it's interesting, for me, the snake is the horizontal version of the dragon. And if we are thinking about that grand alignment and how this is really emphasizing the east-west line of the horizon, so the horizontal aspects of our lives, I think it's talking about really asking us to kind of anchor in terms of time, in our kind of physical bodies and in our physical timelines of kind of moving from kind of birth to death, and maybe just finding ways to heal or come to terms with where we are right now. We've come out of a very, very sort of difficult time, and I think there is a lot of kind of integration that's kind of happening, and possibly coming out of feelings of states of numbness or fight or flight, that type of stuff. And that tends to be when things that we repressed or we had to ignore because we were in survival mode now start to come into our awareness, and that can sometimes feel very uncomfortable. So we kind of think, oh gosh, why am I feeling this now? Like, why am I suddenly feeling sad, or why am I suddenly feeling triggered, or whatever? And it's because we were so busy surviving before, and so we didn't really have time. It's that kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs type of thing. But I think it's important with this emphasis on Sagittarius to try and find meaning in things, even in suffering. If you can find meaning in a situation or some event that wasn't really very positive, then somehow it always makes it bearable. We feel as though our suffering wasn't for nothing. So I think that's really the key thing with the whole kind of Sagittarius aspect of things, is to try and find meaning in whatever's kind of happened to us, say between June of 2021 and now. And then, with the moon, according to Bernadette Brady, this can be about somebody who probes the hidden meanings or the sacredness of life. So again, if we think of Asclepius as the shaman healer, that was sort of the ancient version of today's, say, Jungian analyst or psychologist, somebody who helps us to sort of like swim in the waters of the psyche and to recover sort of our stories, to heal our stories. And so there may be something in this, that we find the sacredness or the meaning in our stories, as very much the way that Robert Romanishin was talking in that last video. And that we might, as a result, have some kind of psychological or emotional breakthrough, or feel a certain amount of relief, as we sort of, maybe we release feelings, maybe there's a sort of a catharsis happening here, where we are kind of releasing pent-up feelings, or just sort of breathing out, exhaling after maybe a difficult period. So very interesting fixed stars sort of happening here, and I think it's going to be a very interesting time, kind of overall. So yes, before I kind of end, I'm going to move over to the cosmic calendar, so we can have a look at the energies of the next 2 weeks, and see what else we can look forward to during this period astrologically. So essentially we're looking at the period between the full moon, which is on the 14th, through to the end of the month, and we do have another new moon sort of at month's end around about the 29th of June, and as I said, that's because the solar and the lunar months are slightly out of whack with each other. So we will have a new moon in Cancer. So I'm not going to sort of go past that point, but we're going to look at this period here between the 14th and say the 28th or so of June. So as I say, we start with a full moon on the 14th. The following day we've got a conjunction between Mars and Chiron. So this could be quite healing. If you have any kind of sports injury of any kind, this could be a great time to visit a physio or something like that. The way that it's sort of tends to be characterized as kind of love, pain, and the whole damn thing. So it could be about healing rifts if you've had an argument with somebody, or it could be about finding ways to direct your energy more positively. So if you tend towards kind of anger or outbursts of temper and that type of stuff, finding more constructive ways to channel your energy, say by doing more physical exercise, and that this could be very rewarding if you are able to do that. And then on the 16th, we've got the Sun making a trine to Saturn, so perfecting that trine that started at the full moon. So this is really, it's great energy for any kind of leadership roles or tasks or events, that type of thing. It's also good for like steadying your energy. So steady accomplishment is possible now. It's a great time when to kind of approach people in authority, or to sort of ask for support from kind of mentors, that type of thing. And sometimes it can be about reaping rewards for past endeavors, because of Saturn's kind of association with karma. But I think it's very steady energy. It's also very well respected sort of energy. So great, as I say, if you do have some sort of presentation to do, or something important, something with gravitas that you want to kind of accomplish. Now on the same day we've got a square to Neptune, and that can offset the energy a little bit. So it's interesting, that those two energies that are going to be really prominent at this full moon, almost sort of perfecting on the same day as far as the Sun is concerned. So this is about, of course, the conscious mind. It's about the masculine. It's about sort of outward oriented events, and sort of, I suppose, the ego, but not necessarily in a pejorative sense, just in the sense of like accomplishment, success, like a status, that type of thing. So I think it's saying, if something does happen to undermine you, or kind of make you, that erodes your self-confidence, you do have Saturn to sort of counterbalance that. So that's a really nice balancing out of the energies. And then a few days later, on the 18th, Venus makes a square to Saturn. So this can sometimes coincide with a time when we feel a little bit lonely or isolated. Maybe we have a kind of a pause or a dip in our social calendar. Maybe, we feel a little bit left out, or we get FOMO because there's not really a lot going on. But it's a good time to sort of stop and kind of what's the word? To sort of consolidate, or to kind of reassess things. Where we maybe, sometimes it can be where we have a difference of opinion with somebody that's older, but generally speaking it can be where we feel a little bit lonely, isolated, like rejected, abandoned, that type of thing. Loyalties can be questioned. You might feel that like a friend is ignoring you, or stuff like that. Or it might be that you and, say, a partner differ when it comes to things like commitment or your approach to more serious types of issues, or there might be kind of boundary issues that need to be discussed. But nonetheless, I mean, it can be a good time, as I say, to consolidate and to just sort of like take a moment and sort of think about, do an audit, if you like, on where you might be violating your boundaries, or where you may feel that someone isn't really there for you, they don't show up for you, or just, as I say, taking some me time for yourself, where you aren't really necessarily being very socially active, and you want to kind of maybe have an at-home spa day, if you like, just sort of like to reboot after a busy week. And then Sunday's a much more positive day. We've got Venus making a sextile to Neptune. So, swings and roundabouts here, I think. So this is very, very romantic energy. It can be great for kind of romantic escapes, or, getting sort of lost in reveries, maybe listening to music, or watching something that is a little bit escapist, just to kind of relax. It's also great for things like meditation, or again, for spa weekends, very, very good, or just a trip to the beach. Neptune in Pisces being very much associated with the sea, so it's a great day for cleansing, and as I say, just sort of a lot here about kind of poetry, love, romance, that type of thing. So it tends to be quite feel good energy. And then the following day, on the 20th, Mercury makes a lovely sextile to Jupiter. So this is great energy for any kind of concentration, for research, for exercising good judgment, so making good decisions, because you're able to see the full picture as well as kind of drill down into the details. Speculative thought, or kind of philosophical thought, so getting into like hypothetical scenarios about how things could kind of play out, so kind of doing like future, if you want to kind of extrapolate out into how something could potentially work, plan for every single scenario. It's good for that type of work. It can also be where we feel very positive, where we think positively and we express ourselves positively. So a good day for a job interview, for example. You'll often have a strong interest in learning and also in teaching. So it could be a wonderful day to listen to a podcast or go to a lecture, or something like that. And then the 21st, this is when the sun ingresses into Cancer. So this is the day of the solstice. So we move from kind of Gemini into that more kind of homely energy of Cancer, where we tend to want to focus more on the private domain, on our family, on the private, in the sense of like, what's not revealed to everybody in the public domain. It's also about nurturing and about nutrition. So it could be about, kind of eating better, about how you nurture yourself and loved ones. Comfort is often a strong theme. So we may sort of find ourselves regressing on some level, or needing to do some self-soothing. But of course, this is kind of a long trend, that we're talking about a month-long trend here. So, mothering children, childhood, nostalgia, all those type of themes might kind of get activated now. And then Venus is also making another really positive aspect to Pluto. So this is on the 21st. And again, great for positive changes when it comes to things like values, money, relationships, etc. So you could find yourself moving into a new phase when it comes to any of those particular areas, and equally could be about making positive changes when it comes to certain structures or lifestyle aspects in your life, with Pluto. So making positive lifestyle changes. And then on the 23rd, Venus enters Gemini, so we get a major shift in the energy here, where we tend to become much more garrulous and social. We want to kind of go out more, we want to travel more. So it could be when you sort of go off on your summer holiday, for example, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, or you just feel like kind of socializing and meeting up with friends, maybe more than usual. So this is again, Venus is normally in Gemini for, a month to 6 weeks type of thing. So this is, again, a long-term trend. And then we don't really have a lot going on until we get to the 27th. And again, more positive energy. So a lot of positive energy happening in the second half of June. So Mars making a sextile to Saturn. Again, very, very constructive energy if you want to make progress with work, because you've got self-discipline and you've got kind of physical energy. So you can really sort of like move mountains almost. This is fantastic energy for getting through like a lot of work, powering through like your to-do list. The only kind of downside is to resist the urge to be a little bit too controlling or too sort of bossy, to be a little bit overbearing. But generally you can accomplish whatever you set out to do. So, good to have a plan, and then sort of like kind of work through it systematically. You'll get a real sense of achievement from doing that. Anything that requires a lot of self-discipline, but endurance, is really sort of well aspected now. I mean, if anything happens in terms of delays, these are likely to be fortuitous. So I think, just sort of like trust the timing of your life. And if you're feeling very sort of, this is one of those power days where you can really kind of do like a massive spring clean, or, run a marathon, or whatever the case may be. It's sort of fantastic energy for getting a lot of work done. And then Mercury will be making a sextile to Chiron. So wonderful energy for kind of getting in tune with your intuition, listening to your heart. It can be a beneficial time to purify your thoughts and your body. So if you feel that you're kind of having any limiting or negative self-talk, or you're kind of you sort of starting to realize some limiting thoughts that you tell yourself that activate core wounds, for example, this could be a good time to do a course. Must recommend the Personal Development School. I've been doing some of their courses recently, and they are really, really good and very practical, and can help you to sort of target things like, reprogramming core wounds, or somatic processing, which can help you to get out of triggered or stress states. So it could be a good day to do something like that, for example. And then the final day is the 28th, where Neptune finally turns retrograde. So, as I say, we're moving into sort of retrograde season, and with Neptune turning retrograde, we are kind of talking about that oceanic energy moving into the inner domain. So this is often, what I like to refer to as the night sea journey, that Jung referred to, where we can sort of swim in the sort of waters of our own psyche, of our own subconscious, and do a little bit of exploring there, go, do some journey work, or that type of thing. And of course, again, this is a long-term trend. This will sort of be very much in play until, probably the end of the year or so. So also a good time to kind of go back over Neptune themed issues in your life. So again, that will depend on what sign and house you have Neptune in natally, as to like what this kind of triggers in you. But I mean, generally speaking, it's about things like, as I say, spirituality, inspired thinking, the art forms like photography, music, and film, as well as I say, things like escapism, fantasy, numbing out, addictions, that type of stuff. So this is a really great time to start working on those things if you feel that Neptune is a particular issue for you. If it's quite sort of like, if it's causing you to self-sabotage, for example, it's a good time to devise a plan to work on that over the next couple of months. So that's kind of it. I hope that's given you a good overview of the next 2 weeks or so. I hope it's going to be a brilliant time. As I say, it looks very magical in terms of all the positive planetary kind of aspects, and on top of that, as I say, we've got this grand alignment to look forward to, which is quite exciting energy. So yeah, I'm really wishing you all the best. I hope you have a wonderful 2-week period, and a wonderful summer if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. And just to say that probably from next month I'm going to be making these forecasts available only to subscribers. So if you've been enjoying these and you'd still like access to them, you can still access them for free. Just subscribe on my website. Just go to astrologysphere.com/subscribe and sign up for the basic, which I think is the silver tier of membership, which is free, and you get my newsletter twice a month, and links to the forecasts will kind of be in there. But yes, just wanted to kind of shout that out, and it would be lovely to have you come and join our inner circle. But yes, otherwise, if this is where we say goodbye, it's been real, it's been a journey, and voorspoed, as we say in South Africa, may the future bring you everything that you kind of dream of. But yes, wishing you all the very best, and happy solstice in advance, and take care. Over and out from me.